Well, how about this little factoid? The UFC featherweight title was successfully defended tonight for the first time since October of 2014. UFC 179 to be exact. That's over 3 years. The man to do it, Max Blessed Holloway, the man to bring some stability back to the UFC featherweight division. He did it tonight against Jose Aldo. He beats Jose Aldo for the second time in a fight that was somewhat reminiscent of their first fight back in June at UFC 212. Max Holloway now wins his 12th fight in a row. He is still the UFC featherweight title, and he puts an exclamation point on what was a fantastic night here in Detroit, here at the Little Caesars Arena, here at UFC 218. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani. It is late here, early Sunday morning, I should say, in Detroit, Michigan. That is the man, Alexander K. Lee, no longer a rookie. He you kind of got it over with in the previous show. Now you're a veteran. Now you're back.
Definitely not.
You just took in the night. You were there, start to finish. You were cage side, media row. Let's talk about the main event first. Let me ask you about the first to the second. Which performance out of Max Holloway impressed you more?
I'm going to have to say the second one a little bit. It was eerily similar, I think, as anyone who watched both fights would notice. I was one of the few people who thought it would go differently. I thought Holloway would be better, though, as I said, he was better in a different way. He didn't finish faster. However, we all talked about how it was a scary thing to face a guy who's so good, who you've already beaten once. Beating him once already was like a Herculean achievement. And then to have to do it again in back-to-back fights, the losing fighter, in the sense is they usually have the advantage. They can study what they did wrong. And this time, Aldo came out strong again. He won the first 2 rounds in the last one. It looked like he won the first 2 rounds in this one. Maybe the second round was closer. But third round, the younger man had more energy, more explosiveness. Max said, it's part of his strategy to let Aldo get all that out and then take him on the third, which he did again. Very similar.
I asked you yesterday if Aldo would use the leg kicks more. He did use them a little more. It just seems like Max Holloway is the better fighter at this point.
Yeah, he used the leg kicks more. They were effective. I think Holloway, though, is good at, we see it might get hit. It looks worse than it is. I'm sure his leg will be sore tomorrow. But when you're in the cage, adrenaline's pumping. It's not going to affect him that much, again, especially since he's so durable. And so while we did see Aldo use the leg kicks more, it only kind of seemed to prolong the inevitable.
It's amazing. Aldo's just 31 years old. He's been around for so long. He's been doing this for so long. I mean, he's been doing it, I think, since he was 18 years old. And it almost feels like he's 37, 38. Conversely, Max Holloway's 25. He turns 26 on Monday, and he just won his 12th straight fight, one of the longest winning streaks in the history of the UFC. I think that's what's most impressive about all this. He's the champion. He defended the title. First man to do it, in the featherweight division since October of 2014. I said, but yet he's still a baby. He's still 25. It kind of still feels like we're not quite, like he hasn't peaked yet. We're just scratching the surface with this guy. Do you get that sense as well?
It definitely feels like we've only just begun. And I think he would agree, because Rogan tried to push on him and say, are you now the greatest of all time? And he immediately deflected that. He said, no, respect to Aldo. Aldo's got all these defenses. He followed up on that in the press conference. He said, I'm not the greatest featherweight champion. Aldo's the featherweight champion. They need to build statues of him out in Brazil. Yeah. You asked about BJ Penn. Is he, could Holloway at least claim to be the greatest Hawaiian? And he still didn't want to claim that. He said, no, that BJ's accomplishments are so massive. He's won multiple titles in multiple divisions, and so he definitely, he doesn't want to claim that yet. But yeah, if you don't think he's on the way and it's possible for him to become the greatest guy in his weight class ever, I think that'd be a foolish thing to say.
So the original main event for UFC 218 was Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar. Is that the fight that you want to see next for Max Holloway?
For me, definitely it's the fight I want to see. That's a great fight, both from a competitive sense, and while I think Edgar has a good chance, even if it turns out to be, let's say, a blowout for Holloway, I can't imagine that. But that's a quality resume builder for Max's legacy. You get an Edgar on there, maybe a Cub Swanson in the future. Again, these are guys that Aldo also beat to become the greatest of all time, as we recognize him as a featherweight. So Edgar definitely perfect, but Swanson would be good too, and maybe both.
Sure. Swanson is fighting next week against Brian Ortega. He does have one fight left on his contract, so we'll see what happens. He could very well leave after this one. He is going to be a free agent. He is fighting out the deal. Ortega, a name to keep an eye on as well. Do you favor Holloway, though? Let's just say it is Frankie Edgar. Right now, do you favor Holloway, or do you say, yeah, he's never fought someone like Frankie. Frankie is tough. I'm going to go with him. Who are you siding with as we stand here today?
At this point, you've got to favor Holloway in any matchup. Again, I talk a lot about the durability of these younger fighters, especially Holloway, and that's a huge factor. But that's not also to take away from his immense skill, intelligence. He comes off as such a likable guy in press conferences, and kind of a cool character. But he's also very intelligent. I don't know if he gets enough credit for how smart he is, not just in the persona he's built, but also the way he fights in the cage. He's not just going to go in there and fight the same way every time. He adapts to different opponents, and he overcomes them. And he does so in spectacular fashion, as he did tonight. And he would very likely do that, I think, in matches with whoever he fights next, be it Edgar or someone else.
I have no problem with money fights. I have no problem with fighters sort of campaigning for money fights. We're kind of living in a new era, and it was kind of brought upon us by Conor McGregor. He was the catalyst for it all, right? He kind of changed the game. But yet, it feels to me like Max Holloway, even though he is so young, is kind of, I don't know, he's kind of an old school kind of guy. He's the kind of guy who's just like reminds me of those days, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where he was like, okay, who's the number one contender? I'll fight that guy next. Do you feel like he's sort of a breath of fresh air in this money fight era that we're living in?
Yeah, especially again with his personality, it feels like he could be demanding things. Let's say, let's fight McGregor again. Imagine how
He doesn't even do that.
No, he has. I'm sure he'd welcome the rematch.
Sure.
Just for the challenge of it. But as far as chasing that money fight, wanting to fight McGregor because of how good that would be for him financially, he just doesn't seem to have any interest in that. Again, like everybody, look at the way he dresses. He had a wonderful red metal tie on tonight. He obviously, those things matter to him. But like you said, old school, as far as we can tell, the competition, winning fights, building a legacy, having fun, those are the things that are most important to him.
Little feather in his cap, he did something tonight that Conor McGregor perhaps wasn't willing to do. He rematched Jose Aldo and also successfully defended his featherweight title. So Max Holloway is well on his way. Let me quickly ask you about Jose Aldo. Where does he go from here? Do you think this is the last time we see him in a UFC title fight?
The easy thing for us to say is, wow, why doesn't he try fighting at lightweight? But that's a very complicated change for a fighter to make. Do I personally want to see it? But again, this is from an outsider's perspective. It sounds cool. Oh, just go up to 155, a whole bunch of new challengers. So logically, that makes sense. I think it would be cool, but you don't know what's going through his mind. You don't know if he still wants to compete at 145. I know it's tough for him to make the cut, but maybe that's just where he's at in his life, what he's comfortable with. A division change would be very fresh, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he says, look, I want to take a few more fights at 145 or fight out my contract and maybe someday, go into boxing as he says he's wanted to do before. There's no guarantee.
I don't want to see that.
I'm not that curious about it either. But there's no guarantees he goes up to 155, even though a lot of things seem to be pointing in that direction.
He no longer has this sort of like undefeated, invincible aura that he once did, but it still seems a little bit weird to see him get beat up the way he did tonight. I mean, he still is Jose Aldo, the featherweight king in many people's eyes, the greatest of all time. Even Jose Aldo, at least right now, Max Holloway, at least right now, is conceding the fact that it's going to take a while before you can start calling him the greatest featherweight champion of all time. Okay, so that's the main event. Let's talk about the co-main event now. Francis Ngannou versus Alistair Overeem. It was said before the fight that the winner would fight Stipe Miocic next. He would be the number one contender. It did not take long for that whole situation to get sorted out. Francis Ngannou with a vicious first-round knockout of Alistair Overeem, a punch that sent Overeem's head back, and he was completely out cold. In fact, Ganu gave him an extra punch for good measure, which I did not like, and we don't have to harp on that, but he was out cold with that big left, and afterwards, even, it took Overeem some time to actually get up onto a stool and then get up on his feet. That's how bad Ngannou knocked him out. How impressed were you with his performance?
It was incredible. And, it had been said if Overeem had managed to finish Verdum in his last fight, a trilogy fight, a rival, former champion, if Overeem had knocked him out, maybe we'd be talking about Overeem fighting Stipe around now, right? Ngannou got the finish that everyone was looking for, that Overeem, that signature finish that guys like Overeem are looking for, to get that shot at Stipe Miocic. And he could not be hotter right now, maybe hotter than any non-champion in the UFC. That uppercut will be replayed for years. Yeah. Regardless of what happens, whether he beats Stipe or not, that's an all-time great highlight. And absolutely, you couldn't be more impressed. He took out a guy with so much more experience and I can't imagine wanting to see anyone else fight him. Even a Cain Velasquez, I'd still rather see Ganu take on Stipe next.
Absolutely. I mean, Cain has been out for quite some time, and Ganu wants the fight. Stipe wants the fight. The UFC wants the fight. But again, as we stand here today, the UFC has yet to come to terms with Stipe Miocic on a new deal. Dana White said that they're in a good place, but from what I'm told, there's no deal signed. There's been talk of the fight happening in Boston, so relatively soon, and then Ganu is obviously leaving this fight without any injury. If they can get the fight done, if they can make it happen, if they can get a contract done with Stipe Miocic, if they can actually, sign him to a new deal, do you think that this could be one of the best UFC heavyweight title fights of all time? Because here you have two young guys in their prime on these great streaks where they're finishing guys, great styles, imposing fellows. I don't know. I can't think of another time where we had a heavyweight title fight where both guys were sort of, streaking and young and in their primes when they went toe-to-toe. I mean, we've had Carwin and Lesnar. I'm not taking anything away from those fights, but this one feels a little different. Do you agree?
It feels real special. It feels like both guys are in their prime. I think Miocic is a little bit older, if I'm not mistaken, but not. He like Ngannou, it's the fight mileage he has on him. It's not that high. And I know these guys go to war all the time when they go in there, and they take they deal a lot of damage with their size and power. But even then, it feels like they're right in that spot, as you keep saying, where it's they're crossing paths at the right time.
Yeah.
Miocic couldn't ask for a better challenger. Ngannou is so hot right now, and Miocic, he beat Overeem, he's beaten Verdum, two great fighters, two all-time heavyweights, two guys who are a little bit maybe too familiar for the fans. Now, when you beat someone fresh, and especially a guy who I'm already seeing on social media saying, Miocic better watch out. This is great challenger, but this is the last thing he wants. He's toast. I hope he hears that kind of talk, and I hope he says, well, we'll see about that. I still got a lot left in me, and I still want to break that heavyweight title defense record someday.
Who do you favor in that fight?
I favored Overeem today. I favored I went with the veteran. I went with experience.
Yes.
And I'm going to be honest.
I believe you went 1-for-4 with your picks, right?
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about this. And I don't want to be on the wrong side of history next time, as I often am, because my picks are terrible. But I'm going to say Ngannou will become the new UFC heavyweight champion in 2018.
All right. That remains to be seen. Let's talk about Justin Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez. What a fight. Immense expectations. In the end, Eddie Alvarez wins via third round TKO. Again, another vicious knee. I mean, it was hard to watch. They gave each other their best shot. Alvarez ends up with like a baseball or something the size of a baseball on his face. We don't know his health status. In fact, I was told that he was transported to the hospital, left the hospital because he wanted to do the press conference, but for some reason didn't end up at the press conference. So there's really, as we stand here today, right now, this evening or this morning, whatever it is, there's really no diagnosis as to what kind of injuries he sustained. Not sure about Justin Gaethje as well. But let me ask you about the expectations. Did this fight live up to those immense expectations?
I think it definitely lived up to the expectations. I might argue surpassed them because there was some concern for me that it would have an early finish. One of them that maybe Gaethje would knock him out and get a good shot, because I've questioned Alvarez's chin given the wars he's been in over the years. However, and you also have to add in the crazy Medeiros Alex Oliveira fight that we saw, which had people's expectations sky high already if they weren't high enough for Alvarez Gaethje. And I think this fight was arguably, and this is where people are going to go nuts, I think this fight was arguably better than that one. It's close. I think they were maybe the 1 and 2 best fights of the year.
Sure.
But I think watching Alvarez diffuse Gaethje, there's really no better word for it because the guy is pure dynamite. Watching him diffuse Gaethje with such slick boxing, and I'm not an expert on boxing, but it just looked like he was perfectly slipping punches, perfectly making it look like he was getting touched but landing much harder and really working that body, just crushing Gaethje's body. And it paid off in the end. He didn't finish with a shot to the body, but obviously Gaethje was tired, probably off balance, got clipped with that knee right in the chin, and that was it.
You mentioned the Medeiros-Oliveira fight. If folks at home just watch the pay-per-view, do yourself a favor and go check that out. That was on the FS1 prelims. Without a doubt, one of the best fights of the year. I mean, we're splitting hairs at this point. I thought it was a little better than the Gaethje-Alvarez fight, but again, two incredible fights. So good that the UFC actually gave them both Fight of the Night awards. Didn't give any performance bonuses. They actually just gave them both, all 4 fighters $50,000. So that's something rare. I think they've only done that twice before. Do you think now we're going to see like, will this fight change Justin Gaethje? We've always talked about how he has this style that is going to come back to bite him. Was it his style that did him in, or did he just maybe lose to the better fighter? I'm
definitely going to say he lost to the better, more technical fighter in this case, but again, that's not to take away from Gaethje's talents. He fought really well. I'm sure if you ask Alvarez, he took a lot of damage as well. Maybe avoided the worst of it, but definitely took some very hard shots. So nothing to take away from Gaethje. He's not going to change.
Yeah.
Gaethje. We talked about Holloway being old school. I feel like Gaethje's old school as well. He's not going to change his style for anybody, regardless of how much damage he takes. And I'm sure his loved ones will be, asking him, please, think about your future. But he's just known for being such an exciting fighter, and you get that feeling that he has a passion for it, and it's something he really loves.
Yeah.
And when you love something as much as he does, like that, he's going to stick to it. I think there's another brawl for him in the future.
Yeah, Gaethje's first professional loss. Quite the sight to see him go down in the third round. By the way, some talk afterwards, and Dustin Poirier was leading the charge. Let's do the rematch, Dustin Poirier versus Eddie Alvarez 2. They had that sort of inconclusive finish back in May. Are you in favor of that, or you want to see Eddie go a different direction? The current title holder right now of most violent man in the UFC, or maybe in the world or in the sport, I don't know what it is, but he's holding some kind of fictitious belt.
Well, I mentioned earlier that he may have to talk to Yancy Medeiros about that belt,
right.
Because that was absolutely nuts. But yeah, I think a matchup between him and Poirier makes a lot of sense. I feel like they both wanted it after, but then there was, there's he said stuff with this guy saying, oh, I wanted it, but he found a way to worm out of it, or he's ducking me. And I don't pretend to know the exact specifics of what goes on with the negotiations, and other than what we see on social media and things like that, and interviews on your show and with other members of the media. So logical matchup, absolutely. Are they going to agree to it and do it next? There's a lot of moving pieces, and I wouldn't be surprised if we never see that match run back, sadly, because it should happen.
What a Debbie Downer.
That's going to become my reputation.
I am happy, though, that the prediction that you had about this fight being a snooze fest did not come to fruition, that they ended up, living up to their word in that regard. Okay, let me quickly ask you about two other fights on the main card. Henry Cejudo defeats Sergio Pettis, although he heard the boos. It was a very dominant victory. He said afterwards he felt bad for the fans, but he knew that Sergio wanted to stay on his feet, so he had to go back to his Olympic gold wrestling roots and take him to the ground. Were the boos warranted, or was this just a really good game plan by Henry Cejudo?
I'm okay with fans not being entertained by that match. That's all right. But Ariel, you're a pro wrestling guy. I'm a pro wrestling guy. When you're stacking your pay-per-view.
Was a pro wrestling guy. Okay, let's not get crazy. Was.
No more?
No more.
I'm a big pro wrestling guy.
I'm sorry. Okay, you can be. I just want to let the record show it was.
When you're stacking your show, when you're stacking your pay-per-view, you don't put like 4 barn burners next to each other. You gotta have a cooler in there. You gotta have like some mid-carders in there. Which is not to call Cejudo and Pettis like lower card guys. These guys are world class.
How dare you? 2 top flyweights. You're comparing this to like a Divas match from 2001.
I didn't say that. And I have a lot of respect for the Divas too. So
you remember WrestleMania 18? They stuck him in there after the Hogan Rock match.
You're a pro wrestling guy. Yeah. You're still a pro wrestling guy.
Was.
You're still a pro wrestling
Anyway, yes.
I think it's okay to have a match like that. It had the potential for excitement. Pettis on the feet looked great. His speed, his hand speed, his footwork, it was giving Cejudo problems. Cejudo said as much after. He said, "Yay, if you beat me in the stand-up, I'm going to go to my base. I'm going to go to my wrestling." And we don't always see it in his fights, but his takedowns today were spectacular. Again, I know people don't like to see that stuff, especially when the other, he gets one takedown in a round and then the rest of it's just on the mat and they're scrambling a little bit. But if you watch how he executed those takedowns in each round, he was brilliant. And again, not a wrestling expert, but there was a lot to like there. But again, to go back to the original question, it's okay, I think, for the Detroit fans to maybe have not been super pleased with how that turned out.
They were a little spoiled tonight.
They were a little spoiled tonight.
They got their money's worth.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think Cejudo got his money's worth too, because that was a great win, and now maybe he's lining himself up for a rematch with Demetrius Johnson, or as he said in the press conference, hey, TJ Dillashaw, if he wants to come down to flyweight.
That's right. Dana White said that the TJ Dillashaw versus Demetrius Johnson fight is a done deal, but I'm told that it's nowhere near a done deal. In fact, it's no closer to a done deal than it was back when TJ Dillashaw won the belt just a few weeks back in New York. So cool your jets on that one. At least as of right now, we clearly know that they want to make that fight, so we'll see what happens in the flyweight division. Tecia Torres beat Michelle Waterson, a dominant win for her. Went the distance. She says she wants a title shot. If you're the UFC, are you giving it to her, doing the third fight against Rose Namajunas, or are you doing Rose versus Joanna too?
I get the feeling they want to give Joanna the right of first refusal.
Okay.
And I know she said she wanted the rematch, but a lot of things can change. Maybe she sees the Ultimate Fighter finale and says, hey, I go up and get that 125-pound belt first. Then I let Rose have a title defense, let Rose have a moment, and then I'll come back and get her as well. Or, again, I'm in favor of Torres. It has to at least be in consideration. It was a very strong performance tonight. She got her first finish last time, dominant win over Juliana Lima, and then a fairly, I think, convincing win tonight over a great veteran in Michelle Watterson, who also put up a great fight. So, and Torres is also one of the only 3 people to beat Namajunas. She beat her in Invicta in their first fight, and then Namajunas beat her in a rematch when they fought in the UFC. So they're 1-1. You want to sell it as a rubber match, or again, one of the few people to have beaten Rose? You've got that angle for it. I think they should at least consider it.
As you mentioned, Yancy Medeiros with a fantastic win over Cowboy Oliveira. There was also a great performance out of Paul Felder against Charles Oliveira. Felice Herrig extends her winning streak earlier tonight as well. Is there any other fight that you want to highlight? Any other performance that you want to talk about before we say goodnight?
Shout out Justin Willis. He got a knockout in the first fight of the night, but it was
pretty.
Yeah, pretty.
Yeah.
It was just a great card from top to bottom, I feel. Again, even if there's some fights that some of the fans found, not at the peak of excitement as so many of these fights were, I don't know if you could build a better card than this as far as exciting fights, logical matchups, implications for future contenders and future title shots. It was just an outstanding show.
First 3 quarters of 2017, I think, for the UFC, somewhat forgettable, but they are ending the year on a very high note when you consider 217 last month at Madison Square Garden. This card tonight, which I think may have exceeded expectations, and a lot of people were excited for it going into it. And then, of course, UFC 219 coming up in just a few weeks, and that's Chris Cyborg versus Holly Holm. So things are looking up for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and Detroit. UFC's return to Michigan, their 3rd show here in Michigan. I think they came out, they represented. Good showing here at the Little Caesars Arena. They even gave us Little Caesars pizza here. What a nice little touch at 2:54 a.m. Eastern Time. It's never good to have pizza this late or this early in the morning, but when you're at the Little Caesars Arena, why not go ham, right? You see what I did there?
I don't think we got ham pizzas, though.
I think there was one with ham. I really do think there was one with ham. You see, this is what happens when it's late. We're basking in the glow of UFC 218. Max Holloway is the reigning, defending UFC featherweight champion. He wins his 12th fight in a row. He successfully defends that title for the first time since 2014. The first person to do it since 2014. Do you remember who did it back on October of 2014?
Putting him on the spot. Jose Aldo.
Yes, of course. Jose Aldo against Chad Mendes in Brazil. Remember that night? Here we go. The blessed era is upon us. We'll see what happens to him next. For now, we shall say goodnight, good morning, wherever you may be. For our crew here in Detroit, thank you so much for watching our coverage from here in Motown all week long. We're back on Monday for the MMA Hour, but we'll say salut, good night, good morning, good afternoon from here in Detroit. Thanks for watching.